Okay, welcome back to Metflex and Chill. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and I'm here with Erin Day from fatforweightloss.com. Thanks for joining me today, Erin. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic, Rachel. I'm super stoked to be on Netflix and Chill. This is going to be a fantastic episode already, and it's on all of the topics that I'm super passionate about too, which is, I'm just so excited.
I'm super excited too. I was actually on your podcast, I feel like it has to have been at least a year, right?
Yeah, it was, you know what? That podcast episode is the second most popular downloaded podcast I've ever had.
Are
So
you
all of the
serious?
stuff that, you were talking about in that podcast is just super amazing. And so many people have gone back and listened to it. And we talked about your study with the CrossFit
Mhm.
and exercise and that sort of stuff. But yeah, that podcast was amazing. So I'm so glad to be able to return the favor and
Yeah,
jump on your podcast, which is cool.
that's awesome. I had absolutely no idea. So your podcast remind me, it's called Fat for Weight
It's,
Loss, right?
yeah, it's just a fat weight loss
Okay, so
show, I
that's
think.
your
Yeah.
okay, cool. We'll talk about all your awesome stuff that you do, because I'm always super impressed by all of your food photography and recipes and blogs and all that. So we'll chat about that towards the end. But I do want to get into a few topics and questions to talk about. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your journey throughout, I guess, the low carb world, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, cool. So if you haven't already guessed, I'm the guy with the accent. I'm from Australia, and I got into keto and low carb specifically whilst cycling. So I was a musician for a long time, software developer for a while, and then during that phase, sitting down a lot, I got really into exercise, shall we say, and that came in the form of doing marathons, doing huge one-day events on the bike. And the reason why I got into low carb space was I was really sick of running out of energy, so to speak. So, always being carbohydrate dependent, being hangry all the time, like not being able to leave the house without having something to eat beforehand. And it was just frustrating. So I was listening to a podcast by Tim Ferriss and uh, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. It was so long ago. I think it was like back in 2012 now. And I listened to that podcast and I thought, you know what? I am going to give this a try, specifically for sports, just to see what happens if I can essentially be bonk proof. And bonking is not a term used in bed. It's more for cycling when you run out of glycogen or run out of
Mhm.
carbohydrate energy. um, so that was how I got into it. And then I started making meal plans for other people, went and studied nutrition, and you know, it all just has sort of unfolded for me, doing recipes on the website now and two cookbooks out, and it's just been such a whirlwind. But it's still like very deeply rooted in sports nutrition, and I think I get so passionate about that. I do have a lot of clients who I help try and lose weight and change their body composition, but I'm really always very intrigued on how the human body can perform better and faster and stronger, essentially.
Awesome, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about that with your endurance training. So you mostly are a cyclist, or you did cycling and triathlons, or remind me
Yep.
again?
So I'm a terrible swimmer.
Me
um,
too.
yeah, that rules me out of triathlons. But I was doing cycling and running. So I've done a few. Uh, 4 or 5 half marathons, and I've done one full marathon in a ketogenic state. We can talk about that, but and then I've also done lots of cycling, and that was my main uh, sort of avenue for a while. So lots of road biking, lots of 300 Ks or 150, 160 miles in a day type events, and that was like the really long endurance stuff was my ball game, because I was able to sustain a very high heart rate for a very, very long time. And that was sort of my unfair advantage for a little while. But I've sort of moved away from that a little bit, and I've started doing more gym work recently, just because of DEXA scans and trying to change my own body composition. But that was sort of my field maybe about 2 years ago, and I still have that. I just don't have the endurance capacity probably as much anymore.
Yeah, I feel like we have kind of a similar story because I used to do triathlons in college and then I moved away from that and did CrossFit. And
Yep.
now I'm just doing like strict kind of weight training.
Yep. Same.
So yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat with you. I do want to potentially do, because I never did a triathlon in a ketogenic state
Mm.
because I found keto after I left college. So I do potentially want to try one in, a low carb keto state because I know it'll be a game changer. But while we're on that topic, why don't you give us a little bit of kind of an idea of when you first, like, if you remember what you first noticed when you went low carb with like your training and maybe like specific races or anything that you kind of noticed from going low carb keto versus where you were at before that?
Yeah, sure. So, for me in particular, I used to struggle with a lot of inflammation. So, a lot of sore knees. I played basketball for a long time in high school, and so that that left me with lots of ankle damage and knee damage and like creaky knees and elbows and that sort of thing. And so, when I went keto, when I went low carb, all of that stuff went away, which was absolutely fantastic because as a runner or as a cyclist, you know how debilitating it can be when you have these niggling pains that sort of reoccur. Maybe if you've trained too much or you've increased your intensity too quickly, those types of things. And that was always a frustrating point for me because I'd always be like limping around with this terrible ankle, but I'd then go and run 10Ks and try and beat my best time. And it just wasn't ideal. And so when I went keto, that all sort of changed. The only thing is that, and there's a caveat to going low carb or keto, is I would definitely do it in the off season, or I would do it
Mhm.
outside of like big training blocks because I have a lot of people come to me saying, look, I want to do a keto full marathon. I've got 4 weeks. I have been, carb dependent my whole life. What should I do? And I said, just keep going with what you're doing and maybe come back to it next year and give yourself a good run up. The I did a marathon in a ketogenic state, and I've also done a lot of cycling in a ketogenic state. And the cycling came first. What I really wish that I knew back then was electrolytes are so important for being able to release the adipose tissue into your bloodstream or be able to tap into your fat cells uh, whilst you're actually doing that activity. Because what I didn't realize is that you store so much water on your body, and as an athlete, you tap into that water storage very, very quickly. And when I went keto, I'd have to bring like 3 bottles of water with me instead of just one. Just because one, there was no electrolytes in that water, and two, I was just feeling thirsty all the time. So electrolytes were a big problem for me when I first started. But also when I went and then I was keto for maybe 2 years, and then I went and did the full marathon. I'd done a lot of half marathons in a carbohydrate dependent state, basically, and I could do a certain time. And I just assumed that in a ketogenic state, doing a marathon, I would be able to maybe do double that time and maybe a little bit longer. But what actually happened in theory was that I blew out that time dramatically. And there was a few things I did wrong. And there's a few things that we can talk about that
Mhm.
other people can do right going
Yeah.
forward. And it's about metabolic flexibility. And it's this, you don't have to be fully fledged keto and only drinking salt to actually perform at your best. But then there's the flip side, is that you also don't have to be having so much carbohydrate that you fear if you don't exercise, you'll get fat. That was a lot of the fear that came from when I was cycling, is that all of these people, they had to ride every single day because their nutrition was really bad. So there's two sides of the coin. But yeah, when I did the marathon, I think I came in for just over 4.5 hours, and I was doing half marathons in an hour and 35 minutes. So I would have liked to have seen just over 3 hours, but it was 4.5, which was really bad.
So when you were doing your half marathons, that was when you were in a higher carb state, right? When you were high
Correct.
carb, and then when you did your full marathon, you were full keto.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, technically, I've never been like super high carb. I was
okay.
probably in a better state doing the half marathon. because I would always train in a very low carb state and
Mm-hmm.
then introduce carbs in the race. And by doing that, I was able to get through the race without too much damage and then go back to being low carb. But yes, in the ketogenic marathon, I was strictly like very, very, very low carb in the training and also in the race too.
Okay. So have you done a race where you've been, well, you just mentioned you were pretty low carb with your half marathons, but have you kind of tested out where you've been, in a ketogenic state and low carb and then introduced carbs periodically for training or during the race? Because you mentioned, obviously, this podcast is all about metabolic flexibility. So
Yeah.
I would love to just chat about kind of your take on metabolic flexibility kind of being, in my opinion, it's really, the end goal for most people should be to be as metabolically flexible as possible. And sometimes, well, for a lot of people, that means not necessarily being in ketosis 24/7. But I kind of want to get your take on, this concept of metabolic flexibility and how maybe you implement it in your life, and we can talk maybe a little bit about your training and what you've noticed when you've been maybe strict keto training versus strict keto but implementing carbs maybe around your training or doing specific carb ups throughout. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So when I first got into endurance and I was into doing it low carb, I read a book by Mark Sisson and I think it's Brad Kearns called Endurance or Endure. And it's basically all about how to progress your training as a low carb athlete. And the gist of it is that you need to build up your fat metabolism, where you need to be able to stay at what they call a maffetone heart rate, which is basically like 180 minus your age and then plus or minus a few points in there, depending on whether you've been sick or blah, blah, blah. But you want to train at that level, especially in your long distance stuff. So whether that's long distance cycling, long distance running, you want to be in that heart rate zone for the majority of the time. And the problem with that is that if you're cycling with a group or you're running with a group, they're always doing 100% pace. They're just like getting there as quickly as possible. And so I had to pull away. I had to pull away from the group I was training with and sort of do my own thing for a while. And what I found is that there's this stigma in the community, especially in the keto community, that you need nothing. You need nothing but electrolytes to get through maybe a workout or get through training and stuff. And that's not what I was finding. I was finding the exact opposite. And well, not the exact opposite, but I was running out of glycogen at a certain point. And yes, being fat adapted first, I think, is the goal. But then that's where you can play with how much energy you bring from fat and how much you bring from carbs. And talking about the maffetone pace before, as soon as you jump over that heart rate zone or over that power threshold, that's where you start burning carbs. And that's where you can start burning carbs very quickly, especially if you're doing extremely high intense activity. And so what I was finding is that I would totally bonk on my training runs when I was doing the training for the keto marathon. I'd just get low blood sugar. Like I got back one day and I tested my blood sugar levels and they were at 40. And I think
Wow.
in Australia, it's like 2 point something. And which is crazy low. And you would think that you may potentially go into a coma because of that. But because of the elevated ketones, your body says, no, it's fine. But it's not a particularly great place to be in. And so I wish during my marathon training that I had incorporated some carbs and some other specific stuff to help get through that process, because it's not just carbs, it's also the central nervous system can shut down, which is a lack of protein, and it's also a lack of electrolytes, which prevents you from being able to use the energy that's being circulated in your body. And so, yeah, recently I read Ben Greenfield's new book called
Boundless.
Boundless. Yes.
Yeah.
I've got it here, this one, for anyone who's looking for it. And in the first chapter, he talks about, and he's done a ketogenic Ironman. And I remember reading all about his stuff that he was doing. And he bonked like midway through the run. So he did the swim, he did the cycle, bonked really hard in the run, and had to essentially refuel with carbohydrates, so plenty of Coke and plenty of whatever, which is, for him, which was such a failure. But he later learned from that, and same with me. Like I just hit a wall at like 35 kilometers and just couldn't run past a certain pace. But he talks about in the book is incorporating some carbohydrates, some protein, some ketones, and some sort of electrolyte, and pairing that together to create this, like, essentially like a metabolic flexible fuel, which is, I haven't tried, but particularly protein, I found when I was cycling the long distances, I would put protein in my the drop bottles, like towards the end of the race, and that always helped a lot. But that's a really interesting concept by Ben Greenfield to go through, and also Mark Sisson and Brad Cairns when they talk about endure, building up that base endurance so that you don't have to always be tapping into that super high glycogen levels all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what you're talking about, the concept, kind of, people have kind of termed it dual fuel now. So being able to utilize fat and ketones for fuel, and then also being able to utilize, glucose, carbohydrates for fuel when you need it. So yeah, I'm super interested in this concept of dual fuel and, of course, metabolic flexibility. But it's just something that, like, I feel like a lot of people, with no matter what type of training we're doing and things like that, it's like we have to kind of test different things out and see, what works. But I think for me in particular, and for what I think, it's, it kind of goes back to not just training, but just overall life and this concept of metabolic flexibility. And you have to actually get into, like you said, keto adaptation first and be fat adapted first to really teach your body how to use ketones and fat for fuel. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people are missing, and especially in, like, the average American diet and things like that. And athletes nowadays, it's like, sorry, they could have this huge advantage if they just, train their bodies to be more fat adapted. And like you said, it doesn't have to be during the season, but, in the off season and things like that, training your body to become more fat adapted, to become more metabolically flexible. And then you can use carbs to, a greater degree than your competitors, really. So I think that's a super, super important concept. And I think that a lot of us who have been, for me, it was like when I first went keto, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I feel amazing. Like you said, I don't have to think about food every few hours. I was doing CrossFit and I was feeling good while I was doing it. But, as I learned, and I did that CrossFit study, but as I learned and it all comes back to time and, like, learning and implementing things for yourself and testing out different things. But as I learned and implemented different things, I realized that, I can use carbs to my advantage as a tool. And it doesn't need to be like a high carb diet. And that's not really what I feel like a low carb keto diet should really be, like, home base. And then you implement carbs depending on what your goals are, what your activity levels are, all of that. So I think that's a super, super important concept. I have another question for you. So in terms of, while we're on the subject of carbs, so for me in particular, I kind of went through, so we've both been obviously in the keto space for a while now, like for many, many years. And so I kind of developed this, I went from being very fat phobic to being very carb phobic. And I'm just curious if you ever experienced any type of carb phobia after, going keto and getting all of the benefits and kind of being like, wow, this is amazing. And you're like, I'm never having carbs again. I feel like a lot of people kind of go down that route. So did you experience that at all?
Oh yeah, totally. So when I first went keto, I always have this sort of concept where, and I'm pretty sure this is borrowed from Gandhi, but at first they laugh at you, then they hate you, and then they join you. And so that sort of concept was me to start with. When I started keto, I was very much in the dark about most things because there wasn't much information out there at the time, and so I love just testing out certain variables and whatnot. So starting keto, there was a big, like, wow, you can't have bulletproof coffee. Like, look at all the butter in your coffee. I used to get essentially teased at work for putting butter in my coffee. And it was funny because I was like, well, I'm just testing it out. Like, who cares? But I'm sure that there would have been a lot of people, like even just going keto, being maybe ridiculed for just the amount of fat that they're putting into that. And so through that process, you build up this thing that carbs are the enemy, and you have to eat so much fat, to be a ketogenic athlete or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And as the years sort of progressed, my family got really into it. So my mum's like pretty strict carnivore right now, and my sister, who's also a nutritionist, is doing the ketogenic diet. She's following the meal prep book that I've got. And so when they see me eat carbs, they're like, what are you doing? You're like, you're out of the family. And so it's an interesting concept, because when you and this is what I learned, studying a bit of nutrition and doing all the things, is that carbs is the most important thing to prevent you from being kicked out of ketosis in particular points. Then protein is the next most important macronutrient. Fat really just does not matter at all, mostly because you can either tap into your own stored body fat, or the protein that you eat comes with a lot of natural sources of fat anyway. So I stopped doing the bulletproof coffees and all that sort of stuff. But then I did a podcast with Zach Bitter, and he's an ultra runner, and he holds the world record, American record, for the longest amount of distance you can run in 12 hours. And he also holds a few other records that I can't remember off the top of my head. But what he was saying was that he uses this dual fuel strategy. So he gets fat adapted enough and then starts bringing carbohydrates in. When I heard that, I was like, here's this elite athlete breaking records, who is essentially a keto athlete, but introduces carbs when he needs to. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So I started doing it myself. I did this like little challenge where I first started going to the gym, and this may be like 2 years ago now. And I started just doing squats, and I wanted to double the squat that I wanted to start with. I wanted to get to 100 kilos at the end. And I was able to do that using dextrose, and dextrose is a carbohydrate. And I was using that pre-workout to help me basically just max out my capacity to be at the gym. And I was still in a ketogenic state before and 2 hours afterwards as well. So there's been studies where people eat 600 grams of carbohydrates in a day and they're still in ketosis. This whole like 20 grams of carbohydrates thing that floats around the ketogenic space is just nonsense, because, well, it's not for most people. It depends on your insulin sensitivity, depends on what you're actually doing with your day. Steph Lowe, who is a nutritionist from Melbourne here, she runs it's the Low-Carb Endurance course, I think. But she has a really interesting concept where the carbohydrate in your diet is a percentage, not just a gram amount. And so when I heard that from her as well, I was like, this opens up a whole new world of like not being in such a low blood sugar state whilst training all the time. And you need to get fat adapted, as you said, but introducing carbs, specifically dextrose, because it goes, it actually fuels your muscles and doesn't, or correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it goes straight to your muscles and doesn't top up your liver glycogen, which is the last to be depleted in a ketogenic state, I think.
Yeah, I haven't experimented myself with dextrose, but I have looked into it a little bit. But yeah, that's definitely something in terms of like ketosis and following a ketogenic diet is, it's a lot of people ask, is this food keto, or, how many grams of carbs can I have to stay in ketosis? And really comes down to, there's no one way that fits, each person. Everybody's their own individual. It depends on your activity level. It depends on your metabolic state, your degree of, like you said, your degree of insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance. And like for myself, for example, when I started playing around with carbs, I had been fat adapted for years, right? And so at first when I started playing around with carbs, like I would get kicked out of ketosis because my body probably wasn't really used to those new carbs. And so it was like kind of this experimental time. But once I would implement them, on a more regular basis around my workouts, like you mentioned, like doing a targeted approach, I noticed that I could stay, like you said, stay in ketosis with a higher amount of carbs. And so I think it's just this whole concept that everybody is their own individual, and you have to really, test for yourself and see what works for you, and realize that, keto is a metabolic state. Like ketosis is a metabolic state. It's not just a diet. It's not just another diet. And so I think that's something a lot of people, especially when you're new to the ketogenic diet or new to kind of this low carb keto lifestyle, it's what a lot of people get tripped up on for sure. But yeah, I actually have you heard of UCAN or
I have,
SuperStarch?
yeah. It's so expensive in Australia. I wish I could have tried it. Actually, I did. Funny story, side story. I did an experiment because I was looking at UCAN starch, and from what I saw from the blood glucose response, I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure that's similar to maybe what cornstarch would be like. And I think that UCAN is a modified version of cornstarch. I'm not 100% sure. But then what I thought, I was like, okay, what happens if I go and get cornstarch from the shops and essentially take 30 grams of that, or 30 grams worth of carbohydrates from that, and test my blood sugar levels? And there was like very little response from that. Admittedly, though, I was very well fat adapted, like you were saying before, and the blood sugar spike was maybe 7 points, and didn't go back lower than it was when I started. It just sort of leveled out, and that was just me sitting in front of my computer measuring my blood glucose every
Oh,
hour
wow.
or half an hour, whatever. So I wasn't even actually using that carbohydrates. And then to take that further, I recently had a continuous blood glucose monitor in my arm, and I think you've been testing with one
Yep.
that's similar.
Got one.
Yeah, you go on. Yeah, and I got that idea from Frida, who's also been doing that for a long time too, and sort of testing out different variables and foods and seeing how they respond. And to test that out, I went and had a meal which had a huge baked potato in it, and I was like, here we go. My blood sugar levels are going to skyrocket. I'm like, I just want to see what happens. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No
Really?
response at
Was
all.
it
And I've
just
had
a baked potato, like no fat or anything on it, just straight baked potato?
no, so there was a steak with the baked
Okay.
potato. So the pairing of that with
hmm
protein and fat, I guess definitely lowered the GI response from that.
hmm
But when I saw that, I was like, okay, if we're so worried about insulin being spiked, or blood sugar levels being ramped up, then what happens when you pair carbohydrates with other foods like protein or fat? Doesn't that negate the issues? I don't know. But it's a whole new world when you start experimenting with your own personal blood sugar
hmm
levels, and it's very hard to measure insulin. But you can sort of guesstimate from the blood sugar levels is that, yeah, there's a whole new world of keto out there, and you got to go find it. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of also another reason, like for me particular, I don't really talk about like the glycemic index or glycemic load that
Mm,
much when I'm, teaching or educating, is because that's only, they're only testing a specific amount of carbohydrates in isolation.
mm,
And no matter if you're fat adapted or not fat adapted or whatever, if you eat carbs alone, it's going to spike your blood glucose. Like that's just what happens. So it'll spike your blood glucose, spike your insulin, and obviously it depends on the degree of your metabolic health, how much that happens. But that's why, when I personally consume carbohydrates, I say, no naked carbs. That's like kind of the saying that
mm,
people say, always pair it with a protein or a fat source. Um, but yeah, that's definitely, and it also comes down to, of course, the individual as well. So, if you're someone who is suffering from type 2 diabetes, or you're very insulin resistant, you're probably going to be more sensitive to those carbs. But again, it just comes down to testing out for yourself and seeing, what works for you, and also your activity level too, and, what type of activity you're doing and all of that. So it all plays a role.
mm.
So I wanted you chat a little bit about how you were doing endurance training for a while, and then you kind of got in a little bit more into resistance training. So what kind of was it just because you were looking to kind of change your body composition, or did you, there's a lot of people who ask me all the time, like they're endurance athletes, cyclists, triathlons, all that. And they're like, I'm not sure how to incorporate, or if I should incorporate resistance training into my training for whatever it may be, if it's triathlon or cycling or whatever, or marathon. Do you have any experience with that? And what's kind of your opinion on that?
Yeah. So unfortunately, when you're training to be a runner or a cyclist or that sort of stuff, when I started going to the gym, I was trying to hack the amount of time that I would either spend running or cycling. And I say unfortunately is because when you want to be a runner or a cyclist, you want to be really good at it, you have to do it all the time, and there's no substitute for it. However, that being said, as a cyclist or as a runner, you build up strong muscles in particular places, and then you build up weak muscles as a response to that. And so going and doing strength training can really help even all of that out. So it specifically with flexibility, with like plyometric training, those types of things can really help be more explosive. So if you're a sprinter on the bike, then going to the gym and doing leg presses is going to help you, 1,000 times over. The reason why I started going to the gym more so than endurance training was because when I did my marathon, and I spoke to Tara Garrison about this, and she's had a similar experience too, where post marathon, so I did the ketogenic marathon. Now I didn't have a DEXA scan before this, and I just wanted to go and have a DEXA scan, which is basically a body composition scan. And you post marathon, and I went and did that, and I was 25% body fat, which is really high for a male, and that's, well, not like really really high, but it's not ideal for an athlete. And the reason why is because I'm in a normal BMI range, but my muscle was very low and my body fat was very high. And I see this all the time with endurance athletes, is that they eventually wear out a lot of the muscle that keeps their metabolism high, that keeps all of their lifespan longer. Essentially, they've just worn all of that out, and to replace it, it comes along with body fat, because your body goes, well, I don't know how long you're going to be running tomorrow. I'm going to store this for later. Hopefully, you use it. And Tara Garrison had a similar experience where post marathon she was possibly just the highest weight she was, and you go, what is going on? Like, why is this happening? And so that's when I was like, okay, I actually did some damage to my ankle. So I thought running can stay there for a little while, and I'm going to go to the gym. And I was able to like essentially recompose my body in the space of 8 weeks down to 17% body fat. And whilst it's a move in the right direction, probably still not enough really. And so I'm still trying to get that down currently. And I've got a bad baseline essentially, but that high body fat from endurance training, you can, and this is just a little theory that I've got, but when you are doing a lot of endurance training, you're doing a lot of stuff that really maxes out both your cortisol levels, all of your stress levels. You're just so taxed by the whole training, is that one, your body holds on to a lot of body fat, but two, you also get substantially more hungry, or like you want to eat a lot more food than you would if you did the exact same amount of work in the gym, where you're not tapping into so much of your glycogen storage. And when you want to like when your body uses a lot of glycogen and you have that low blood sugar feeling, it's horrible, and you want to fix it immediately. And the aid to that is just eat a lot of food. But the problem is that that doesn't do you any good with your body composition. So I think it's just like really hard to even out. So that's sort of my thoughts. And a lot of people, a lot of endurance athletes and cyclists and stuff have been coming to me with the exact same problem, going, what is going on? Like, why is my body fat so high? Why, especially when I do keto, what's like, why, like strict keto on this type of thing? Like, why am I suddenly feeling fat? And it's something that I still haven't really got my hands around so much, because I haven't played with adding more carbs into an endurance-based training. But I definitely think staying low carb during training and then using carbs during a race is is probably a way to fix that. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think, with endurance training and just from my past experience and kind of what I advocate when someone does ask me that question, if there is, an endurance athlete that's asked me, should I lift weights or what? And just from my past experience, when I was in college doing triathlons, the first probably two years, I didn't really lift any weights. I was kind of just getting into it, training with my club team, just swimming, biking, running,
Yeah.
all day, every day. And I didn't really, we had a few weightlifting sessions or resistance training sessions that were kind of scheduled in every week. It was one or two sessions a week. And I would go to them sometimes, but I would kind of skip them and wasn't really focused on that. And then when I got to my junior year of college, I started, I met somebody, my friend, and she was really big into lifting. And so she started encouraging me to come lift and stuff like that. And so I started lifting. And so I was lifting, but also training for triathlons, but I wasn't training as much as I was before, because I was putting a little bit more time into lifting just because I started to enjoy it more. And I started to lose weight. I started to, build some more muscle, and my triathlon times got so much better. I got so much, my times went down, and I just felt so much better and so much stronger when I was racing. And I was like, oh crap, this makes sense. I have more muscle in my body. I can use these muscles to my advantage. And I think that's something that a lot of people miss out on just in the endurance space, is that they're not, like you said, they're tapping out their cortisol, they're tapping out and just, training so long, so just cardio all the time, and not thinking about, their muscles and building up that part of things. And so I think that's also in terms of not just the endurance space, but the fat loss and the weight loss space. I think we're getting a little bit better. But it's still, you go in the gym and you see people are just on the treadmills or on the ellipticals, and they're so focused on cardio. Cause it's with cardio, what I've noticed is a lot of people are so focused on that is because you get kind of that instant gratification. So when you're doing cardio, you're sweating, your heart rate's up. You feel like you're quote unquote burning calories. Whereas if you're in the gym lifting weights, you might not, most days I don't even break a sweat when I'm lifting. But it's not instant gratification, right? It's delayed gratification, because you're not, yes, you can feel your muscles working, but you're not really going to see that body composition change for a little bit longer, for a little while. And so I think that is just something that that's kind of one of the other things I'm really trying to encourage, especially women, to do, is
Yeah,
get in the
especially
gym and
women.
and lift heavy weights. You need to be lifting weights if you want to change your body, change your body composition. Yes, diet is so important, but if you aren't lifting weights and resistance training, your body is never gonna look toned or however you want it to look. So there's that saying, skinny fat, that you've heard that before, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's me.
Where you can lose a lot of weight, but once you lose the weight, you're like, oh crap, I don't even look how I thought I was going to look. And it's
Yeah.
usually because, you spent so much time focused on diet, which obviously is important, but then spending so much time on the treadmill or, elliptical or whatever it may be, and neglecting the weights. So, and I think that's another thing that a lot of people don't realize, that the muscle is so metabolically taxing to your body that when the more muscle you have on your body, the more calories and energy and fuel you're using throughout the day. So if I'm just sitting at my desk if I have more muscle on me and I'm just sitting here working, I'm actually burning a little bit more fuel than I would if I had less muscle, because muscle is just so metabolically taxing. So that kind of means the more muscle you build, the more you can technically, eat and still maintain where you're at. And so I think that's a concept that a lot of people are missing out on, because it comes back to that whole instant gratification piece of it. And so I think playing the long game is super important, and realizing that the more muscle you build, the better off you're going to be down the line.
Yeah, definitely.
So
And
I could go, yeah.
Well, speaking specifically for females, there, I recently we bought a house, and so there was no, I sort of had to move gyms, right? And so the gym that's up the road is mainly for females. And I joined there with my partner because she really loves all the classes and that sort of stuff. But I got there and I thought, okay, I can do this. This is, I'm generally the only guy in there in the entire day, and they look at me strange, like, "What are you doing here?" But in saying that, though, I go in there and use the weight room, and all of the running and elliptical and treadmill machines are all being used all of the time. None of the weights are being used any of the time, and it's great for me because I get to use whatever machine I want. But I want to change that because that's terrible. Why?
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconception about lifting weights, and there's this like hangover period from the 80s that aerobics and cardio burns the most fat.
Mhm.
And maybe in theory, but like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to be there was a concept that I just thought of, be strong, not skinny. That's it.
Mhm.
And
Love that.
yeah, it just really brought it to my attention. I thought, wow, none of the weights machines are being used here. And I want to help change that because it's terrible. I mean, that maybe it's because there's a lot of misconception around what weights will do, but then there's also a pretty steep learning curve as to what you actually do.
Mhm.
And I've been using an app called Fitbod recently, which basically gives you like an AI generated workout. And I had no idea about lifting weights. I was like, uh, I knew what power to weight ratio was, and I knew what all the power meters did, and all this sort of stuff in the cycling and the running world. But I had no idea what to do in the gym, and so that's a pretty steep learning curve for most people too. So, that
Yeah.
just a little bit of input.
Yeah, it can be super intimidating, especially, when you go in the gym and you can get on a treadmill or get on an elliptical and,
Mm,
no one's looking at you. No one's
yeah,
like, no one cares. I mean, no one cares either way, but like, it's easier to do that than to go pick up a weight,
yeah,
or a dumbbell or even a barbell. But I think that it just comes down to kind of putting your ego aside,
yeah,
and realizing that when you step in that gym, like no one cares, right? No one cares what you're doing. They care about themselves.
yeah,
They're looking at themselves in the mirror, right? And they're not paying attention to you. So it really comes back to, just putting your ego aside. And then also, if you're not familiar with it, do what you did, download an app or start
mm,
watching YouTube videos or,
mm,
go. I'm sure, everybody has a friend who lifts weights. Go lift weights with your friends or hire a trainer just to begin, invest a few months in a trainer who can teach you how to lift correctly and properly, and then, branch off on your own. There's so many different ways to approach it. So I think that it's honestly just a tragedy that for myself, like I wish I knew this earlier as well. And so I'm trying to like continue to help spread the word, especially for women, like get
mm,
off the damn treadmill.
yeah.
Um,
Like a deprogramming of the
yeah.
of the treadmill zombies. Like, let me just show you how to do this. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. But in saying that though, as you said before, like no one cares what you look like or what you do at the gym because they're also focused on themselves. And you think about what you think about when you go to the gym, like, oh, wonder what people think of me. Like everyone's doing that. And so, and no one talks to each other because everyone's got headphones on and they're looking at their phone, scrolling Instagram. And it's interesting, but
Yeah,
it's
it's
definitely a way to improve your body composition without uh, going down the rabbit hole of eating way too much food than you need to.
yeah, for sure. And then also just another point that, cardio isn't necessarily bad. And it
Mm,
definitely, like I look at cardio as, obviously you want to implement some type of cardio and conditioning into your regimen to, build up your aerobic system. And it's not bad, but I think it's very overused. And I think that it should be used, especially if, changing your body composition and losing fat or weight loss or fat loss or whatever you want to call it is your goal. Cardio should be used as a tool and not something that you do, right off the bat or on a super consistent basis, because you can adapt. This is something that a lot of people don't realize either. Like you can adapt to cardio so easily.
Mm.
Like running, if you go run on the treadmill, there's only so much you can do before your body starts to adapt to that. And what I mean by that is that you start to, maybe you were burning a certain amount of calories when you were running for the first few weeks, and you're running that same distance, your body is going to become more adapted to that, and you are going to actually start burning less because you are becoming more, I'm blanking on the word here.
Efficient.
Efficient. Yes,
Yeah.
that's the word. Yes, you're becoming more efficient at it. So that's good if you're training for something, right? If you're training for a marathon or training for a triathlon, you want to be more efficient. But if your main goal is doing cardio to burn quote unquote calories or to lose weight, and you become efficient at it, then you're just doing way more and exerting yourself way more and not getting, the same bang for your buck. So that's where cardio can be very, not useful if you continue to do it like that. But with weight training and resistance training, it's so much harder to become efficient at it because you can always add, another rep or another set or, lift 5 more pounds. So you're adapting and you're becoming stronger, but it's so much easier to become less, like you're not becoming as efficient as cardio would be. So I just think everybody should lift weights.
Yeah. Well, and as saying before, like, not all cardio is bad. And Dr. Rhonda Patrick, who runs my Health Matters. No, I don't know. She's got a podcast as well. She talks about the benefits, brain wise, to doing cardio, specifically with BDNF, which is like brain derived neurotropic factors. And the sensation that you get from doing cardio, as you said before, like feels like you're burning calories, but it's actually changing the way your brain deals with certain emotions. And maybe I used to think about going on the bike as partly my meditation, was because you just get that brain relaxation feeling. And so, yeah, it's really, really good to do sometimes, but not all the time. Like your brain, you don't want to meditate 8 hours of the day to get nothing done, right? And so, and going to the gym is much more time efficient too. However, I do think if you are doing cardio, try and do it outdoors, because, even me living in Queensland, like it's the sunniest state in Australia, and Australia's already pretty sunny, right? I was deficient in vitamin D. And that can be a huge problem for so many people, and specifically for people who do things like walking on a treadmill in the gym. Just walk around your block, say good day to your neighbors, or that sort of stuff. So much more useful and a better use of your time than just going to the gym to be on a stationary bike or a stationary elliptical or something like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that it also comes down to a lot of people are also so focused on, cardio and nutrition, and then they forget about also like the concept of NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is your activity outside of the gym, which includes walking and things like that, walking your dog or taking the stairs or things like that. And that is such a huge component as well, and something that I neglected for a long time and didn't even think about. And when I started paying more attention to that, like paying attention to my steps, I actually stopped. I used to drive to my gym, which was 3/4 of a mile away from my house. I used to drive there and spend like 10 minutes trying to find parking, 10 to 20 minutes some days trying to find parking. And then I would work out, and then I would drive back home, which was 3/4 of a mile. And then this is when I hired my own nutrition and fitness coach, and kind of went through my own transformation. And he just like put a fire under my ass and was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you driving to the gym? And I didn't even think about it. I was like, I just was going through the motions. And he was like, if you just walked to and from the gym, like that's a mile and a half that I could get in every single day. And I started doing that, and I started paying attention to my steps, and my steps went from like, I don't even know, 4,000 to like over 10,000 a day just by doing that. And it was like such a difference. And I was like, why have I not been doing this? And then it just becomes a habit, and I like look forward to it. It's a good, warm up, cool down type thing. So it's just kind of becoming aware of these things. And, even if it takes, hiring your own coach to become aware of these, it's like, it's so powerful. So I think awareness is a huge piece of it for sure.
And definitely time too, because most people, you probably would have been driving to the gym because you go, I want to get a 45-minute workout in, but I only want to spend, 5 minutes getting there and 5 minutes getting back, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
And same for most people. But like, you don't have the time not to think about this stuff. And it's the same with meditation. People who go, I really don't have the time to meditate, probably are the most prone, or maybe the people who need meditation the most.
Yeah.
Because yeah, and I was the same for a long time. Like, I would finish a really long bike ride and then look at my watch and I'd be like, oh man, I'm only at 2,000 steps. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And it's you really got to build a lifestyle out of it. And on that topic, actually, I find Fitbits are really helpful with getting to 10,000 steps, because they've built an app that is very, very good at producing those rewards for getting certain amounts of steps and going forward. I got a Garmin probably about 3 years ago, and it just lowers your step goal compared to what you did yesterday. And it's really demotivating, because you're
Oh,
like,
really?
oh man, I did 12,000 yesterday, but I only did 3,000 the day before. And it's just telling me to get to 4,000. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, to try and find a device that you like, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. I have an Apple Watch. And I have like the setting where, I don't know if you can't see that, but it's like the circles. So it tells you like if you've reached your circle yet, and you can like look at it like I'm 3/4 there almost, but for the day. So I think that, yeah, Fitbit, Apple Watch, those types of things are very, just having something where you can track, and that's kind of in your face all day, and continues to remind you. It just helps you build, those habits, which is super important. So getting to kind of the last topic I wanted to chat about. So I know that you are super into meal prepping. You actually just came out with a book that is all about meal prepping, and I myself am super into meal prepping. I think it's very, very important. I try to like post it all the time on my Instagram, and I see you posting all the time as well. So one kind of kickback, or what's the word? Yeah, like one kind of kickback I get from clients, that when they don't, they say they don't have time to meal prep, or they just don't enjoy doing it. Do you have any tips when it comes to meal prepping and planning and things like that? And yeah, just any tips or ideas or things that, might help out with someone who's intimidated by meal prepping?
Yeah, totally. So there's probably like 3 ways to go about it. And I really like the approach that you take on your Instagram stories, where you prep a lot of the proteins first, and then you can piece together meals that you need to throughout the week, depending on what you've got and depending on what your needs are. So that's the first way, because that gives you a lot of flexibility, and that gives you a lot of the flexibility to buy what's on special at the shops. You don't have to prep so much all in one go, and it gives you a lot of options when you actually get to dinner and you say, I really don't feel like steak again. Oh, I've got chicken prepared. That's going to be a great substitute. So that's a really great way to do it. The other way is to find meals that don't necessarily need cooking. So on YouTube, I've got a meal prep for the week, basically, that goes through and uses things like barbecue rotisserie chicken, or I know that tuna is full of mercury, but using tuna or sardines or oysters or those types of things that come in a can maybe, and pairing that with a side of salad. And I give people this plate analogy, where on a plate, if you divide that plate in half, you want half of that with like green leafy vegetables. Obviously, if you're doing carnivore, maybe not that, but and then you want 25% of your plate filled with some type of protein, and then 25% of your plate filled with fat. Now that can also get a bit confusing, because you go, well, like there's fat with the protein, and then there's protein, fat, but it's just a general term, and it's really just to give you an idea of what a ketogenic diet looks on a plate, because everyone knows what a standard diet looks like. It's like rice and whatever. Like, people are so confused when they're not able to cook with those particular carbohydrates. So that's the other way, is like doing meals where you can figure it out without having to really cook anything. Therefore, you really don't need that much prep. You just buy the food. And then the last way is to sort of combat the idea or the notion that meal prepping has to be the same recipe every single day of the week. And that was the most common concern that I got when I first introduced meal plans or meal prep. And the reason why I say meal plan and meal prep, meal plans I sort of think about as having maybe taking just leftovers for lunch the next day. So you've made dinner that night and then you just take leftovers for lunch the next day. And probably most people do that already. Maybe some people still buy lunch at work, and it's a bad habit you need to get out of it. But and then meal prep is the taking that one step further. So maybe doing it on the weekend, or maybe you can do it you break it up between like Sunday night and Wednesday night. But doing 3 different meals and just using those throughout the week. So maybe you've got a spaghetti bolognese that's made with slender noodles, or zucchini noodles or something. And then you've got what I like to call crack slaw, but I don't know what it's essentially egg roll in a bowl. And then, there's other recipes that are just like really super easy, freezer friendly, and that don't take too much time to make or prepare or think about. Once you've got a few of those recipes in your repertoire, so in your head of things that you know how to cook, that's when meal prepping becomes really, really easy. But to avoid the like eating the same, what I used to do was make a huge pot of chili, or maybe a big lamb roast, and have that for lunch and dinner for the next 5 days. And by the day 5, I was done. I was so done with that exact same recipe. And most people enjoy a little bit of spontaneity in their life. And there's a tipping point, definitely. Like you can't have variety all the time and want to better your body composition. So there's a little bit of a balance point there. But they're the sort of tips that I'd give to people. The next tip would be is like get a sharp knife, because no one, like blunt knives take double the time to chop, and so probably are the most the best thing to invest in is like get a really sharp knife, learn how to use it, then you'll be able to do everything. And then things like maybe getting a food processor, or maybe getting an air fryer, or maybe getting some type of appliance, learning how to use a skillet, learn how to use the oven. Just do one of those things in a month and see how you go, because learning how to cook, the people who know how to cook are usually much more healthier than the people who don't know how to cook. And piecing together recipes from different bits in your fridge is like the gold standard to meal prepping. You know how to piece together food and make a recipe and make it taste delicious. So that's sort of what the book that I wrote is all about, is taking recipes that are maybe not just protein and salad and cream, or like something like that. It's creating a whole bunch of recipes that are in the macronutrient profile of a ketogenic diet, showing you how to make them and adding them to your own repertoire, and then taking you through that journey of going from week 1 to week 8, and then teaching you how to really use that going forward. Because meal preps and meal plans and stuff are fantastic, but if you don't know how to do it yourself, then you are very limited again. So that's my idea of meal prepping. That's how you can sort of make it easier. Those tips hopefully help some people out there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And would you say, in terms of like meal prepping and planning, for me, when I am working with any clients or anything like that, that is like the number one thing that I try to just bury into their minds. Like meal prep and planning ahead is so, so important for success. If you're trying to do things last minute, or, if you are someone who's tracking macros, and I call it playing macro Tetris. So going throughout the day, trying to piece together different foods into like this macro Tetris type thing. It's like, maybe it'll work like 1 or 2 times, but usually it fails. And so it all comes back to, prepping for success and planning for success. So with clients that you've worked with, what have you found, like in terms of the clients who do meal plan and do meal prep? Do you find that they have much more success in terms of if their goal is fat loss and body recomposition versus those who don't?
Yeah, so there's two different clients that I sort of work with. There's the people who have families and the people who don't. um, and the people who have families have a really hard time meal prepping because obviously their week's pretty jumbled and they don't really know what's going on. Plus, they have to feed like a million other mouths as well.
Mhm.
And so meal prepping for them can be really tough. And what I usually say is that, and actually, Jonathan Keto Road also sort of advocates this way, is that take what you're making for your family and just eat the bits that you can. So if you're making, uh, you know, bolognese, for instance, or maybe even like a casserole, just make a little separate one out of the ingredients you're already going to make for your family with the bits that you can eat. So that's that side of the equation. That's not necessarily meal prepping, but you can obviously plan a lot of the recipes for your family in advance by, here in Australia, Kmart's a really popular shop. I don't think it is in the US, but I think it's Target for you guys.
Mhm.
But you can go there and you can just get like a notepad of A4 sheets of paper that have like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday on them. And if you can plan out your meals in that sort of way, like not necessarily tracking macros, but if you can do that first, that's a great stepping stone. And then for the people who do like to track macros, you know, as as you said before, like trying to make those puzzles fit, it can get hard because maybe you're not trying to feed a family, but you're trying to feed a partner, or you're trying to feed someone else who maybe wants to be keto but isn't really that, fond of it all the time. And so a lot of those clients, they really benefit from meal prepping because it can be the difference between KFC and keto. And when you're, for instance, like we were coming home from IKEA a little while ago, and it was like 9 o'clock at night, and my partner and we pulled into KFC, and I'm like, nah, I've got stuff that I've already prepared at home, so I don't need any of this. This is not for me.
Mhm.
And so when I got home, I had my uh, chili soup or whatever I made. I can't remember what it was, but it was the difference between KFC and keto for me, and that can happen weekly. And for people who like break out of that cycle, then meal prepping becomes this like huge task where, oh, I don't know what to eat. I don't know what this week is going to be like. If you are prepared, then you do know what this week is going to be like, and then you can alter from that plan if you need to.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the more you do it, the longer you kind of put this habit into place of meal prepping, it's just like the easier it becomes. And it just becomes like a lot of people comment on my Instagram, like, how do you do all that? Like, in the without it taking up your whole Sunday, because I do it on Sunday. And honestly, it only takes like the max time is 2 hours to do
Yeah.
everything. And I'm just like set for the entire week. It's because
Mm.
I've done it. I've repeatedly done it, and I found kind of things that work for me. And it's really just finding like those things that you enjoy. And then also when it comes to the work week, I really find that, for me, I don't mind eating, like you said, I swap things in and out throughout the week, but for breakfast and lunch, especially, like those meals they don't have any emotional value for me.
Mm.
Like I'm working throughout the day, which most people are either at work or they're rushing to work in the morning, or for lunch, you're kind of in that work mode. And so those meals don't really have an emotional value. So it's kind of like, okay, I can eat the same thing pretty much for those meals throughout the week. And then maybe I switch up dinner, especially if it's with, my family. Maybe I put a little bit more effort and time into dinner versus, breakfast and lunch. And it's kind
Mm.
of just, realizing these things and becoming more aware and conscious of that. So I think more of the story is, prep for success. That's what I always say. Preparing and planning is always going to be something that will help you to reach your goals way faster than if you weren't doing that. So
Yeah,
I-
and specifically when you're tracking macros, I was watching a video with Mike Mutzel and Ted Naiman
Mhm.
that they just released recently, talking about protein and how most people over the age of 40 do not get enough protein. And that's actually a common concern for a lot of my clients too, because they come to me and I give them a meal plan, and it's usually so much more protein than they're used to eating. And that's like I really only give them about 90 or 100 grams
Oh,
in a
wow.
day, which is not much at all, really. And it's just way too much, and they need to titrate it back to about 60 grams a day. And for that to be the case, like your body's not able to create all of the things it needs to with that little amount of protein. And fasting can help with that, with the autophagy and things and protein recycling that happens, but it's really not going to be a good base to build from. And so that's also an issue, and being able to meal prep proteins in particular so that you are able to get enough protein throughout the week. And maybe if you don't digest proteins very well, then looking at your digestive system and looking at maybe taking some stomach acids and those sort of things, they're all things you need to speak to your doctor about. But, being able to prep protein to be able to maintain a good level of protein so that you have all of those things going on in your body is probably one of the most important ones, I reckon.
I 100%, 150% agree. Protein is something that especially in my Keto For Women program, that's something that when women come into this program, they're all eating so little protein. And it's like, we got to bump your protein up. And exactly same with other clients that come to me. It's like their protein is so low. And if we can just bump that up, it's like, it's crazy what a difference it makes, especially with body composition and building muscle and things like that. So protein is super, super important. So wow, we've talked a lot. We've talked a lot about many different things. I think we covered everything that I wanted to talk about. So I do have one last question for you. So if you were a type of food, this is such a random question. I like asking random questions at the end of the podcast. But if you were a type of food, what type of food would you be?
Oh, damn. Something ridiculous. I don't know. I would be
just the first thing that comes to mind.
A nasturtium. I don't know.
A what?
A nasturtium's like an edible flower. And every time you eat one, people just look at you really strange. And so that probably resembles me because I always have these really bad dad jokes, and I have these like really stupid sayings that just come out of my mouth. And I later think about it and I go, I don't really know what that was. And, maybe for some people eating a nasturtium was like, yeah, I probably won't do that again.
Oh my gosh, I was not expecting that. And so how do you say a nasturtium?
Nasturtium, yeah. Maybe it's an Australian way of saying it. I get so many comments on my YouTube video
an
on
edible
saying
flower.
vegetables. Yeah.
Okay.
It's an edible flower. It's like if you were to go to a fancy cafe and ordered a salad, or you've ordered some type of breakfast and it comes with flowers on top, you can probably eat them. Check with the waiter first, but I think they're called nasturtiums, and that's probably what I'd be. Just a weird thing to be around.
Well, I've never heard that before, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
That was so out of the blue. I have no idea. I could be an avocado, just really boring and fat.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's probably what I would pick. But thanks for calling me boring.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm just going to dig myself more of a hole.
No, you're good. I'm just kidding. Okay, so just to end, what do you have anything? I know you just came out with a book. So you have 2 books out right now, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Can you tell us what those are?
Oh yeah. So the first one is the Keto Sweet Tooth Cookbook. And if you've got a sweet tooth like me, then being able to get a cookbook that has all like tried and tested desserts, and there's super easy ones, there's really complicated ones depending on what you want to do, and yeah, that cookbook's fantastic for people who love sweets and those types of things. But for most people out there, they probably think like sweets are a bit of a nice to have. So that's where the meal prepping book comes in, and it's called Easy Keto Meal Prep. It's available on Amazon, anywhere you can buy good books from. And that one's all about making meal prep really easy, really approachable, and also making really good food. So it's not just like boring salmon and salad, or I don't know, which is really delicious, but maybe not for every single day of the week. So that's sort of what that book tackles. And I've just started a 3rd book too, so I don't know if I can release the name of that one yet, but keep your eyes open for that one too.
Wow, you're on a roll. But I've checked out your actually both books, but I've made a few of your dessert recipes, and oh my gosh, like I can't even, they're amazing.
Oh,
Um,
awesome.
and then so you have a blog, fatforweightloss.com, where you also have tons of recipes as well, right?
Yeah. And so because I'm from Australia, it's like .com.au as well.
Oh, okay.
And I don't even know where fatforweightloss.com would take you, but
Oh,
it might take
sorry.
you to my website. No, that's fine. So if you remember .com.au, then yeah, heaps and heaps of free recipes go up on that website. Majority of them are like desserts and snacks, because pretty much everyone knows how to cook steak. Pretty much
Hmm.
everyone knows how to cook particular proteins, and so those just aren't as popular. Whereas desserts, things like lemon curd cheesecake, or pecan pie or pumpkin pie or apple pie, those different types of things. Even though apple isn't considered keto, you can use an apple substitute that tastes pretty much exactly like it. And chocolate chip cookies. If you want to go to my website and just try one recipe, do the chocolate chip cookies. They're on the homepage. And I've had people send feedback from videos from their kids tasting these cookies, and they're like, "Mom, it tastes normal. Wow." So if you're looking for normal tasting keto recipes, go to that website.
Yeah, for sure. I can attest to that. And your photography. If you want to just go to a website and drool over food, go to Erin's website, because your photography is, oh my God, it's absolutely amazing. I'm so jealous. I wish I could take pictures like that.
So I can attribute most of the skills learnt from photography. One, by doing a lot of it, but two, there was a course that I took called foodtography,
Mhm.
and I think it's run by a lady called Sarah, and she just breaks it down really easily. And that was sort of where I fully developed my skills for food photography, and it's very approachable. So for anyone who's listening and wants to take that course, that one's out there. But yeah, the making food look good is a really skillful thing to have, but it's not something you use every day. Like, you don't make every single meal look like a food
Mhm.
photography
Yeah.
plate, because it's just probably not edible afterwards. there's yeah there's so many things that go into it that are yeah, just make it really fun and creative. Like, I was a
Mhm.
musician for a long time, and so I love being creative, and that's sort of that outlet a bit too.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. I might have to take that course.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anywhere else that our listeners can find you besides your website?
I do have a podcast that's called the Fat for Weight Loss Show. If people want to go listen to that, if you're into meal planning and want to see what a keto meal looks like, then go to my YouTube channel. Apart from that, Instagram, Facebook, I'm all over the social medias except for Twitter. And that's sort of it. If you love what you heard, then just jump on the website and you can go from there. But I really appreciate coming on the podcast. It's been such an honor, and it's awesome to be able to talk about the metabolic flexibility, because I feel like it's still a new space in the keto world.
Hmm.
But let's make it happen, and let's get it out there. I say.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm so happy that you're able to come on. And I feel like we talked a lot about a lot of really good points that should hopefully help our listeners. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And if you're listening, definitely go check out Erin's chocolate chip cookies. I can attest that they are freaking delicious. All right. So thanks for coming on, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Rachel.